Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Another warm one today. Hit, I think 102 yesterday, 103, something like that. Pretty warm, and looks to be something like that again today. So thought I'd go ahead and get this walk out of the way. So apparently, the Supreme Court has ruled that affirmative action on the collegiate level is unconstitutional. There's a lot of people up in air. Saw yesterday that Joe Biden, he's saying that this isn't a normal court. Some of you and I might think that, oh, well, it's just crazy Joe talking. He gets up in the middle of TV interviews and just walks away. Did you see that one yesterday also? Anyways, it's actually much bigger than that. Remember back when the Clinton era and the Bush Gore stuff, and there was all this talk about a constitutional crisis. Yeah, well, having a president discount and talk like that about another equal branch of office, that's kind of getting into the constitutional crisis neighborhood. France, once again, is burning to the ground. Them people, they like to revolt. Unfortunately, they haven't figured out how to do it and then get something done. They just like to go out and, I guess, protest and burn things and turn things over. It's almost like a big, after some big game party, you see when the Super Bowl is done, or a hockey team, or basketball, or something like that. But it looks pretty bad this time. They're saying this could be one of the worst ones in the last 20 years or so. And not getting into the details so much of why. It's because a police officer shot someone. Just looking at that stuff, and if you haven't seen it, you should probably look. It's getting pretty crazy. They're driving cars into buildings, setting buildings on fire. They burned a library to the ground, one of the big, I think in Marseille or something like that, burned it to the ground. Lots of police officers injured. They've called in all kinds of help and assistance to try to get the rioting and protesting and all that stuff, calmed down. But the point is that I'm trying to get to is that France, in a sense, right now is burning. I don't think it's the end of France, and I think that probably in a few days, maybe a week or two at most, it'll calm down and kind of go back to somewhat normal. But here's the thing. Right now, France is experiencing a full-blown SHTF, at least for the people that live in the areas where this is happening. And every time stuff like this happens around the world, and I've said this many times, we should all pay attention to it, watch it, see how it goes, how the government reacts, how the people react, how the supply chains, how all the infrastructure reacts to it, so that we can learn from it. Because you might find yourself at some point in the future living in an area that very exact same thing is happening, where it's just absolute chaos. Now, over the last 3 years, at least 2 or 3 years ago, America experienced some of the very similar things to that with the BLM riots. So some of you probably have seen that firsthand. The way that things are going in the world, though, I'd say that there's a pretty good chance that that kind of thing, behavior, rioting, disruption of society, is going to become more and more possible, more and more of a reality. And so we, as prepared-minded people, should be prepared for that, should be getting ourselves ready for that more and more. Have a plan, because, we all may have our plan for when everything just completely falls apart and the total apocalypse is here. But what if that never actually happens? What if the SHTF is just lots of things like what's going on in France right now, where society is just, you know, uprooted, but yet government and infrastructure and supplies and stuff, for the most part, keep going with just some interruptions here and there. And then on top of that, the possibility of finding yourself in a very, very violent situation. We need to be prepared for that and have a plan. I've talked about going out in public, especially for those of you that live in the cities that have a lot more violent activity. Do you have a plan for that? Do you have your own evacuation plan? You and your child, you decide to go do some shopping that day. You go to town, you go into the shopping district, and you start to pull into a shopping center or a grocery store or wherever it is, and all of a sudden your vehicle is surrounded by people throwing things at your car, screaming, yelling. You notice all of a sudden that off in the distance there's cars on fire, people yelling and screaming, dancing, jumping on top of the vehicles, throwing rocks. What are you going to do? What's your plan? Do you have a plan for a scenario like that? Because honestly, the world that we live in, that scenario is probably more likely to happen to a lot of you than Chinese troops paratrooping in the backyard. And so we should be taking active measures to prepare against that. You know, the video I made a few weeks ago about just situational awareness. When you're out running around, are you listening to the news on the radio, or listening to your music, or talking on the phone, or talking to the children in the back seat of the car? Or do you have everything kind of turned off so that you can have all eyes and ears on what's going on around you? I'm not telling you what to do, but it might be a good thing, especially when you start to get into an area, you know, where you're going at slower speeds, where people could kind of surround your vehicle. I mean, there's certainly been places in this country for a long, long time, many years, where you don't dare stop at a stop sign because they'll surround you and take the wheels off your car or something like that. That kind of behavior is going to just become more and more profound. It's going to become more of a reality for so many people. And we should be taking the time now that we have it. We may not have much time left, but we should be taking the time watching videos of what's going on in France, kind of staying on top of that, and then formulating a plan. There's certain websites that you can go to, YouTube channels that you can watch that are kind of experts. A good friend of mine has a business, and it's in-person training and distance training. This guy is former special operations, I won't go into his background, I'll leave that for him sometime, but he most definitely has the background to teach this stuff. He has a business called ironsurvival.com. Should probably go there and see if there's anything that would help you folks out. But taking the time to plan for this, having kind of a bag of gear in the vehicle. Do you carry? A lot of people have truck guns. It's becoming easier and easier to do that. There's these companies I was looking at the other day. If I can come up with the money at some point, might get me one. These tri-folding ARs. Stuff like that. Excuse me. Just being able to have the gear that you need to protect yourself is important, but it's not the only thing. You also need to be observant. You need to be watchful of what's going on. Not tuned into your radio or the kids screaming in the back seat. When you're out in public walking around, you know how likely it is that this kind of stuff happens? Or just a bunch of bad people running in the store to steal everything? Or some random shooter pulling up in front of the shopping center? Because it's happening a whole lot more lately than it has been in the past. The more it happens, the more unstable our society becomes, the greater risk and the greater chance that you have of being in the middle of it. So, as much as you might think that where you live, it's okay, it's not that big a deal, you're in a safe area. I've heard people tell me, I've lived here for 20, 30 years and nothing's ever happened. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of these places that's had mass shootings and outbreaks of violence could say the same thing. In fact, that one in Texas a couple of months back, where that white supremacist Mexican drug guy, a cartel guy, gang guy, shot up that shopping center. A long time ago, I used to live not too terribly far from that. And I can tell you for a fact, and I still know people that live down there, that that's not a bad area. It's not a high crime area. It's not an area where, you know, bad things happen all the time. That's a typical middle class kind of bedroom community north of Dallas. And so I'm sure, and I know for a fact, that nothing like that has ever happened there. So quit telling yourself that, well, nothing like that's ever happened here, so I'm pretty good. That's the case with a lot of these. You need to be preparing yourselves for violence, for mass rioting, for just complete breakdown of society. Again, it doesn't have to be the end-all apocalypse for this to happen. We've seen it happen for the last few years all over the world, and everything still exists. These kind of breakdowns in society, even if they're temporary, can happen anywhere. And even if they're temporary, you might say, yeah, well, it may only last 2 or 3 weeks and things will start to get back to normal. Well, what damage can be done in those 2 to 3 weeks? I mean, your home could be burned, your children or you could be beat and shot. There's all kinds of things that could happen in those 2 weeks time period or week or whatever it is when people are doing the things that they're doing right now in France. So stop telling yourself that you're going to be okay where you live and people don't act that way there. I mean, just the fact that there's millions and millions of illegals pouring across the border and they're being dispersed all over the country, whether by the government or just by their own 2 feet. You're getting a lot of people in neighborhoods that have never been there. They're not grounded in that neighborhood or in that community. You don't know what they're there for. They could be there for criminal activity. That's part of the reason why we're seeing an uptick in crime. Look at Europe. Look at the amount of crime happening in Europe. Random knifings all over the place. People, women just being randomly beaten, attacked, sexually molested. Some of them right in broad daylight. A good portion of all that is because of all the refugee and immigrants that's come into European countries. In fact, is it Sweden or the Netherlands? Someone, there's an article a few months back saying how the average woman, how many times higher she was at risk today of being raped than 10 years ago. And it was many, many times higher. It's because of all the people coming into their country, these illegals or refugees or just immigrants. And it disrupts the balance of society. There is a balance in society when a society is functioning properly. And when you remove that balance, for whatever reason, economic problems, social problems, attacking traditional basic moral values, throwing a bunch of people that's from third world countries and not from that area. And that's exactly what's all being done. All those things are being done. So, and then a government that's ever increasing corrupt. So even the good people of the community have had enough. They're fed up. They're willing to fight back. You put it all together, and it's kind of a recipe for disaster. And if you're smart, you'll take precautions and make your plans to kind of work around that. And what will you do if these types of things break out in your area? Folks, you need to be getting your houses in order. You need to be preparing yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Probably go over to that friend's website, ironsurvival.com. Might be able to learn something there. Thank you all for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.